Hi, Argo kids. Welcome back. It's Mrs. Thorson. Today we're going to be going over Chapter 12, which is the judicial branch, specifically the Supreme Court of the judicial branch. So we're looking at the structure of the federal judicial system, and the Supreme Court is what we're focusing on today. There's 9 justices, 1 chief justice, and 8 associated justices. Their job is to make sure that there's uniformity in interpreting the Constitution and the national laws. And if there's ever a conflict between the states and each other, or the states and the national government, they're trying to solve those problems too. They can decide whatever type of case they want to get. They can take original cases. They can take cases on appeal. They can take state, federal, criminal, civil cases, however they want. But most of the cases they take are civil. And they, like I said, they can come from lower state courts. It can come from the U.S. Court of Appeals. And then it can be original jurisdiction, usually involving like fights with states or fights with other countries. This is just an example of one of their dockets in 2007. They only took 71 cases. They take pretty much between like 70 to 100 cases a year, and most of them are civil cases from the federal courts. So how do they get picked? Like I taught you in Chapter 11, for all judicial appointments, same with the Supreme Court, the president nominates and the Senate has to approve it. For the lower courts, they do this thing called senatorial courtesy, where yes, technically the president can choose a nominee and then the Senate approve, but like there's so many things the president has to do. With lower courts, like a district court that might be in like San Francisco or something, that's hard for a president to pick a judge for that because it's so far away and it's so many things, so many choices they don't really know. So they let the senators choose it. It's just kind of this unwritten tradition that you let the senator of, like in that case, California, pick it because they have better knowledge of who would be best fit for a court like that. And it's just a good way for the president and the Senate to work better together. The president does have more influence on the appellate level, but definitely a lot. They are picking the one for the Supreme Court. They have really few constraints of who they nominate. They just need to be careful because you don't want to pick someone who's got skeletons in their closet. And if you're a Republican president, but the Senate's ruled by Democrats, you can't pick someone too far to your political ideology because the Democrats wouldn't approve, and vice versa if it was a Democratic president and a Republican Senate, like we saw with Merrick Garland, President Obama's choice in 2016. The Senate was ruled by Republicans, and they said no to this guy. They didn't even give him a hearing. So usually what will happen is before he announces somebody, he'll have his Department of Justice and the Attorney General look into good choices. Sometimes nominees don't make it, and they usually don't make it, like what I was just saying before with the Merrick Garland situation, when the president is of one party and the majority of the Senate is of a different party. Now, for the Chief Justice, they can either bump someone up to Chief Justice or just pick a brand new Chief Justice. It's not a seniority thing. It's just purely what the president wants to do. Here's just some examples of people who've gotten denied, and usually in those situations, the president was a different party of the majority of the Senate. What are judges and justices typically like on the Supreme Court? Generally white men. They generally have some type of law or judicial experience. They tend to be of the same ideology and party as the president, but that doesn't necessarily mean they rule the way that appointing president would like. Probably the most infamous example of that is Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice now. He was appointed by President Bush, a Republican, but he's made a lot of decisions that have been in favor of the Democrats. I'm just going to skip that for now. So here is the current court minus Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who just died recently. But right now, that's Justice going bottom left to right, Justice Breyer, Justice Thomas, Chief Justice Roberts, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Alito, and in the top, President Trump's appointment, Neil Gorsuch, Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan were both appointed by President Obama. And then the most recent one is Brett Kavanaugh, who's also appointed by President Trump. So here's what they do. To accept a case, they have 1 million people that try to get cases heard by the Supreme Court every year. They have to have the rule of 4 follow. So the rule of 4, that 4 of the 9 justices want to hear it, and then it comes to the court. So if that happens, they issue what's known as a writ of certiorari, which is basically a piece of paper that says, we're going to take this case to whatever court had it or in the first place. So they pretty much, out of all the cases that get sent to them, they only take about 1% of those cases every year. So how they make decisions. What happens is the case is heard in front of the court. Each side of the case, each litigant, the plaintiff or the prosecutor and the defendant, each get a 30-minute argument in front of the 9 justices, and then they meet in a conference and to discuss the case. Once they've made their decision, one of the justices has to write the majority opinion, which basically is this, like, think of it as like a 15 to 20 page, like, argumentative essay as to why they made that decision. But there also can be, if there's a dissent, meaning like if the vote isn't a 9-0 vote, let's say it's a 5-3 or a 6-3 vote or a 5-4 vote, one of the justices who dissented, who was against the majority opinion, writes why they disagreed with it. And every now and then you can have a concurring opinion, which is someone who voted for the majority, but for a totally different reason than the majority opinion writer voted for that decision. If you ever hear the court making a decision known as stare decisis, that just means that they let the decision stand from the previous court. A lot of these justices try to base their decisions on what's known as original intent. So it's almost like they're wearing like one of those "what would Jesus do" bracelets, but in this case, it's like a "what would the founding fathers do?" And they were wanting to make the decision purely based on original intent. Probably out of all the justices right now on the court, the one that's the biggest proponent of original intent would be Neil Gorsuch, one of President Trump's appointments. They also make decisions based on precedent. They see, well, this was decided in the past, so that's how we should keep things. But every now and then it can be overruled. Probably the most famous example would be Plessy versus Ferguson allowed separate but equal facilities for blacks and whites in the South. And then Brown versus Board overturned that precedent set by Plessy versus Ferguson. So here's the deal. Once a decision has been made, there's not like a magic wand that magically makes things happen. So like with Brown versus Board, that said separate but equal is unconstitutional. Any separate facilities for blacks and whites in the South, unconstitutional, they can't be allowed anymore. There's no magic wand that just poof, you wake up the next morning and voila, there's no black and white separate schools or facilities in the South. They actually have to rely on other people to get it implemented. They have to rely on the enforcers of those decisions. In that case, that would be the southern state governments. They need to rely on the interpreting population, meaning that people understand, the American people understand what's happening. The implementing ones, as I just said, like the state governments in that sense with Brown versus Board. And then the consumer population, those who would be affected by this decision. In this case of Brown versus Board, it would be the black and white population in the South. Like I said, there's no magic wand for this. And with Brown versus Board, that didn't get implemented right away. The South kind of, the southern white governments just kind of ignored it. They're like, yeah, we're not going to do that. Thanks for making that decision for a Supreme Court. So even if they make a decision, they have to rely on others to actually implement it, which again kind of goes back to the idea of checks and balances. You don't want one branch to become too powerful. All right, so that's it for the Supreme Court. Make sure you find your Supreme Court case and do that flyer that will be due tomorrow. I will talk to you guys later. If I can get out of here. There we go.